whose name I shall not mention. So you've got parents saying, look, is it all right if we can he just play and have fun? Well, yeah, that's fine. But at one point, we want them to compete. And I think at the other end, you've got competitive aversion, and you see it with club players who will just stay in the zone of participation. And not to do it down, well, a little bit maybe, it's kind of like the cardio tennis crew who will come for their weekly hour and a half, and they will stay in that group, right? They will not go out and compete. And I know from speaking to a lot of the coaches on this call that this is a deep, deep source of frustration for you as coaches. And look, let's face it, we do need the cardio tennis crowd and that group. We need it to earn money. We need them. That's our bread and butter. So I'm not saying in any way we should ditch that. But I also know that if you're teaching people involved in competition, also known as playing tennis, then it's a much, much richer, more involved experience for you as a coach. And I know coaches tend to get bored if all their program is the turn up, play, have a bit of fun, and then go home and don't play matches. But I think really the core of the problem for me is that getting the player to go from the zone of participation into the zone of competition is so hard. It's almost impossible. And because they're so competition averse, particularly if they've been doing this for years, but they just don't tend to do it. And I mean, this is a discussion I've been having with our friend in Australia, Ryan, who's on the call here. Hello, Ryan.
Hey, how you going?
And I think Andras, he may be on the call as well. I'm not sure. I can't see him, but he may be. They've started a group called Make Tennis Great Again. And the whole ethos of that group, I know it's a bit Trump-esque, but there you go, we'll run with that one. So Make Tennis Great Again, the whole idea is to really solve this problem of how do we get people almost straight into the zone of competition, bypassing the zone of participation. And I think there's a culture out there, and Johan, I know you're going to back me up on this. I just know it. I can see it in your eyes there. There's a culture that says that it's not all about winning, right? And the frightening thing is, and Sam revealed this, and Indu revealed this. I got told off by the head teacher when I was in a school because I was doing games that were competitive with young children. And the children, it was like 1984. I don't know if you've read the book, but the kids would come up and they'd say, oh, but coach, it's not all about winning. And then they grasped me up to the head teacher. Can you imagine that? That's the culture, though, that kind of, it's encouraged in the UK actually not to compete. There's an anti-competitive culture there. What I want to do with today's discussion is split these two in half. So I wanted to explore this one before we move on to the problem of the individual and match anxiety. So I wanted to know what people thought, particularly about that problem of how we get players from participation to competition. Or maybe you think that actually that's a really good thing. Let's keep them in the zone of participation, and there's some benefit to that. Personally, I see it as a big problem. And so, I mean, Sterling, do you have any comments before we throw it wide open?
Yeah, so I listed a few things. I took that question, why is it so hard to move people from the zone of participation to the zone of competition? And I tried to think about, well, what is the zone of participation? What is the objective of just having players participate in something versus compete. And here's what I kind of came up with. I'll throw it out here. No competition produces a safe environment where people can be accepted with no judgment passed about their individual abilities. Okay, so that's the first thing I kind of came to my mind. The second thing was participation creates an environment free of this judgment. Where no competition produces a safe environment where people can. Not really sure what happened there. Okay. Sorry
you have an alter ego. You have an alter ego.
Sorry about that. Yeah, there you go. Sorry. So the second.
We'll get to that next.
We'll get to that later.
There you go.
Yeah.
So the second thing
Terrible.
is the participation. This environment of participation. It's free of judgment, where players have the freedom to choose for themselves whether they want to push themselves mentally, emotionally, and physically in the activity or the sport, right? So it leaves it up to the individual to choose for themselves whether they want to push themselves or not. Because if there's no competition, there's no pressure of the score to push them to win or lose, right? Number 3, the participation it's void of keeping the score. So if you're not keeping score, there's no measurement to determine who wins and loses. And so it creates sort of this mindset of we're all in this together equally, and it's more fair to everyone who is participating, and we eliminate this concept of hierarchy or pecking order determined by the skill set of the individuals participating. Okay? And then the last one is there's a distortion of perception that occurs within a person, an individual, when they're in a participating environment. And this distortion is described as it's a result of human nature. We as human beings, we naturally gravitate to comparing and contrasting ourselves with others. And it's for the purpose of discovering our own potential when we're in this environment of achieving certain objectives, especially in sport. So if we're not going to allow players or participants to compete, then we're creating confusion in the minds of those individuals because we're denying them or restricting them the opportunity to discover their own potential, right? So without measurement, if Dan and I were just hitting a ball back and forth and there was no score involved, we are equally denying each other and ourselves the ability to discover our true potential because there's nothing to measure that. But the minute we start keeping score, now there is the potential to discover our own abilities, our own skill set. And there's a mechanism of testing out whether we're growing in our skill or not. And so that's kind of what I came up with now. And I'd love to hear any thoughts about that.
Wow, that's a very deep subject matter. I have a huge problem. I have a huge problem with society in general pushing this participation trophy medal thing that has been going on now for, I don't know, a couple of decades. Oh, we don't want to hurt this kid's feelings. Everybody's got to be happy. There shouldn't be this stress. Look at all this suicides, this, that, you know. I mean, you know, I just look at that from an ultra competitive guy, and I'm as competitive in everything. I mean, I even play my little boy now and then with pool, and I have to hold back. Let me not crush this number 8 black ball into the pocket. I could so easily do, but I just think that we have really gone down a path that is alien to human nature, in my opinion. I think we are trying to sugarcoat, and in a more blunt term, we're trying to put some lipstick on this pig and think that this is the new norm. This is totally against human nature. I mean, if I go to the bushveld, I can't tell you, I grew up in Zululand, and so my dad, when we would drive and go visit grandma and grandpa in St. Lucia, 200 miles away, and drive these dirt roads, my dad would say, okay, guys, you want to see elephants this weekend, or do you want to see lions? What do you want to see? There's so many game parks, and the topography was different, and many places had different animals. And when I go to the game parks and I hear foreigners sitting in my Land Rover, oh my God, I hope that lion is not going to chase the poor little baby antelope. Oh my God, oh my God. I mean, I'm like, this is the essence of competition. The strong will survive. The smart will outsmart the lion. They'll go lie down in the grass and just hide and have the same color skin. I mean, this is what I have a problem with intellectuals trying to tell people that you got to think a certain way and you got to conform to a certain mindset. The outliers in this world are dangerous people. And I'm not saying I'm one of them. I'm just a little guy that played a ball. But you look at the biggest business people, the biggest minds of our time over many, many hundreds of years, and some were horrendous people. They've done enormous harm, but look what they accomplished because there are so many sheep. And I guess it's been going on for millennia like that. But now we're sitting here with an incredible technology called the internet, and there are more sheep, in my opinion. It's a wonderful medium, and I think it's a great thing to have. But it grinds my soul to go to a tennis tournament where my own little kids are playing, and my little boy loses because he's playing 12-year-olds because he's pretty good. He's 7. He gets whacked. But then he comes home and says, Dad, look, I got a trophy anyway. And he's hanging and he's looking at his medal. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, what should I tell him? That, that's great, I have a problem with it. Fire away.
I feel your pain, Johan.
Anyone else?
What am I going to do what am I going to do with myself?
So is anyone here fundamentally disagree with the fact that competition or that participation restricts the capacity for a human being to discover their potential?
It's impossible to disagree with a statement. It goes against human nature.
Yeah.
Simple.
Johan, I'm curious, how did you handle that situation when your 7-year-old comes home and he's got this trophy, and clearly you disagree with the whole thing? I'm just curious how you handled that.
Look, I don't know. I didn't handle it. I just let it go. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, because when you start making a big deal out of it, it creates friction and all that stuff. And, I didn't want to take it away from him and say, no, you don't deserve it. But I know that he's little and he's not a mature kid. He's 7 years old, but he loves his tennis. He's very fast on the court. He loves the sport. I'm just going to keep trucking. Let this other little stuff being a distraction, because I know at the end of the day, I will give him when he's adult and 14 years old and can start understanding these concepts of, hey, I put my ego on the line. I was willing to suffer that pain of getting whacked by a better player today. And those are the things that I think are going to be the most important aspects. This plastic thing hanging on the freaking door, the door, on a pin, that's fine. I mean, I guess, all right, I'll just run with it. But I don't like the pussification of our youth in any sport, any which way you look at it. It's just you can't. There are people that inherently have a DNA in them that are brilliant musicians at age 3, can go and play Mozart, and I cannot hit 2 notes if my life depended on it. Why? Okay, the kid is freaking brilliant. He has a photographic memory of whatever. He can listen to music and play it. Why are there people that can do calculated math faster than the best calculator on the planet Earth? Why? I can't do that. He's got a talent. People that say to me that there are people that is not talented, they don't know what the hell they're talking about. There are people that are just DNA-wise much more smarter than we are. Why is it that so many Asian kids are flooding our colleges in medical science, math, science? Why? I don't have all the answers. There are just people that have more drive. There are people that have more brain cells. I don't know. Why is it that the athletes that we see in the Olympics are just phenomenal athletes of a certain race that are just stronger and better and faster? Not everyone, but you can make a general assumption. Why? So I just, I have a big problem with the mindset of everybody should be equal, everybody should be happy. I'm sorry. It goes against human nature. There are always going to be people that strive more, that have more drive. And it could be physical. It could be their own mental capacity. Look what happened after the wall fell in 1989. How many phenomenal tennis players came out of the Eastern Bloc?
Is it right? I just want to hear from Sam on this, because we've been corresponding on this question.
Yeah, let me unmute Sam. There he is.
Thanks, Joe.
Sam,
Yeah, I mean, I think I am faced with it probably most days. For me, the frustration it starts at school level. It starts at, the nursery age when our children are 3 or 4. Certain schools everyone has a certificate, everyone has a badge, everyone goes home with a medal, everyone is on a level playing field. And that stems through the school network here in certain settings. I've got 2 girls that go to a private school, and competition is key. It is, sports day isn't everyone's a winner, everyone gets a sticker. There is first, second and third. There are teams cheering for each other. There are girls. If somebody fails the high jump, then they have a ton of bricks comes down on them. But that's the environment which they thrive in, to have those sets of expectations. I have other children who, it's like you go into school and say, why are you playing sport? Well, it's for fun. Well, yes, it is for fun, but what's the overall factor that you're trying to achieve as a team? Just to enjoy it. And I'm like, no, it's not. You are trying to outplay, outbeat, outsmart the other children, on whether it's on a tennis court, whether it's on a cricket field, whether it's on a rounders pitch, But for me, the children have it from the schools. Everyone's a winner. They go home, and then the parents instill the same philosophy. It's a taking part. It's the, it doesn't matter where you come as long as you've had fun. If you didn't try your best, that doesn't matter. And as a coach, I get very, very frustrated with it all, because it's like, actually, no, why am I wasting my time sometimes when I've got the parent on the sideline going, well, you tried your best, or it doesn't matter because you got a certificate. The tournaments which, some of my gang go to, everyone gets a certificate. So there's no kind of winners or losers in that format. And for me, I get very, very frustrated. And Chris, my other half, who's a coach as well, we kind of have this how do we instill in these children the ethos that you are entering a competition to do your best, but the outcome is to win. And sometimes it's like smacking your head against a wall, because they'll just come back and go, yeah, but my mummy said that it's just taking part that counts. That's a winner. That's where I've done well.
Sam, that's really interesting perspective, because as we were saying last time, I don't think people realise how bad it is in the UK. I think it's bad in the US, but you know, we get in trouble.
Yeah.
I think there's something we need to all ask ourselves too. Is this attitude of, are we making things worse for ourselves as a society when we are sort of pandering to the emotions of people and trying to make no one upset and no one offended, instead of teaching people that you can only be offended if you take offense, right? That it's a personal responsibility in how you respond to every situation that happens. So I think that, you know, in Johan, in your case, man, I would admonish you to actually have a discussion with your son right now. And in a way that, you know, you're in your own way, of course, but to sort of have this discussion around, well, you know, what is the value of winning, right? Something, right? And what is the value of just participating? Because those values are not the same. Okay. Mm-hmm. There's more weight that is to one or the other. Why? Because there's a higher price to be paid to win something than to just participate. And there's always a price to pay, right? And there's always an opportunity, whether you win or lose, to learn about yourself and about what you're capable of and what you could be capable of. And so I think that I'm not convinced that going down this road of handing medals or certificates to everyone that participates, I'm not convinced that that's actually going to make our society better than the idea of leaving things the way that human nature has already established them. That you just don't get something if you show up. It's pretty easy to show up. It doesn't take a lot of effort to just appear and show up, right? I mean, it does take some effort, but there's a level of effort and there's a level of struggle that you must embrace in order to achieve beyond just showing up.
Darling, I want to bring Ryan in here because it's 3 o'clock in the morning in Australia. And the reason I want to talk to Ryan is not just because he's a very insightful person, but he is from Australia, the land of winners. At least they are from the UK's point of view. And what I wanted to ask was, Ryan, we were going to look at some concrete solutions, and you've been working on this problem with the Make Tennis Great Again. What are your findings so far about this problem of participation and competition?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I'm finding that it's the entry point to tennis is a lot of the problem in the zone of participation through lessons rather than through match play or competition. And I think that we should be adapting the game so everyone can play from entry point and then have a real reason to do lessons rather than have lessons to do more lessons.
Okay. So the lessons for the sake of lessons, I would argue, is choking the sport to some extent. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a great point that Ryan makes. If we progress the game in a way that adapts to whatever the skill level of players are there, right? Because beginners, they don't play advanced games unless you just want them to fail immediately. So a better solution is to progress the level of skill, of difficulty for the individual. Ryan, have you found that to be a better solution?
Yes, I have. You can bring the level right down to 2D tennis for 2-year-olds hitting a bigger ball along the ground, moving up into bouncing ball, handball, table tennis, etc. right up. And they love it. They love to compete. They want to keep going, play with their friends, bring new friends in. They can play with their mum and dad and their brothers and sisters. And then they want to do lessons because they want to get better faster.
I have a question.
Can I?
I have one question real quick, because I think this is a point that really needs to. Do you think that adults have become softer than actual children? Because I'm convinced that children are a lot tougher than we give them credit for.
No question.
And I think
Good.
that we as adults we've sort of gone off in our heads like this is better for our children if we don't allow them to suffer or try to endure something. Okay? I have 3 kids. I have a 21-year-old, a 20-year-old, and a 12-year-old. And I can just remember growing up with my brothers. My dad, I'll tell you, now that he's gone, I look back and I go, God bless my father for allowing us kids to struggle through what we did and try to figure it out. And he was extremely supportive, but he was in no way pandering. And I think there's a better solution here, like Ryan, has alluded to, the idea of watching the level of difficulty. And we as coaches we've got to understand that we have the opportunity through competition to pass along wisdom to these kids on how to deal with their emotions. And so it's our responsibility as coaches to be able to have an answer when a kid is crying, or we need to be able to provide a safe place, but a place that is not void of trying to take away that struggle from the individual, but understand that that's there to help them grow. And we're actually keeping them from growing if we don't allow that to sort of happen organically and naturally.
Sterling, I'm quite keen to start the second half with just to conclude, I think we need to start with competition. So when they're coming in, let's start them competing immediately and make that the base of everything we do. That I think is Ryan's approach. It certainly wasn't mine, but that's where it starts. And I love your point about adults being more risk averse than the kids. Thank you for that. So if you want to start with the different problem from the individual point of view, from the match anxiety point of view.
I would say that, once the match starts, there becomes a whole nother set of issues that can arise. And we know that when you start a match and you start competing, it's much more of a psychological, the problems that occur are more psychological, mental, and emotional. And so the typical sort of sports psychologist's opinion or viewpoint on this is just trying to offer players this idea of, which is not, these aren't bad things. I'm not saying these are bad things. I'm just saying they offer general advice like visualize or control your breathing and all these techniques. And to me, they're great, but they're so general. Okay. And so one of the things that I've tried to reconcile is do these general things really get a player back in the zone and concentrating and focus? And my conclusion is it doesn't. You know, it may make you feel better physically if you just breathe deeper, and it may be fine to visualize, but visualize what, right? So to me, the answer is we need to be more specific about the problem of match anxiety or solving it. And so my take is, I think we need to look at the specific plan or expected action that the player wants to accomplish during the next point, or while they're in a point, and then between points. Okay, so I would say that there's we kind of listed 4 specific things that we've come up here with at the Art of Winning, and it's this: 1-2 reset strategy, 2-shot sequencing, caging, the concept of caging a player, and then momentum scoring system. So real quick, I'll go through these. So the 1-2 reset strategy is one that keeps a player's mind resetting back to the present moment. And then you're getting the player more to stay in the zone for longer periods of time. So 1-2 reset is I count 1, I count 2, and then I say reset. And then I go 1, 2, and then I say reset. And this is something that if a player rehearses it enough in practice, it becomes more of an automatic response. And they get to the point where they're not even verbalizing it anymore. They're actually hearing it in their head, or they just feel it in their being as they do it. 2-shot sequencing is deciding ahead of time before the point even begins, what's the 2-shot pattern or combination of shots that you'd like to play. And so if you get a forehand here, where would you like to go, right? Or a backhand here. And then rehearsing them consistently in practice leads you to being able to automatically recall them in a match. And so 2-shot sequencing uses the concept of chunking information. Okay, so you're establishing a relationship between this shot and the next shot, and you're looking for that relationship to line up to be successful. And so 2-shot sequencing also initiates anticipatory skills, like the player begins to predict or expect the next shot to return to them, and then they expect to play and continue the point instead of then trying to just end the point and not expecting something to come back. So there's a greater level of expectation while the player is playing if they're relating one shot to another. And that can go another way as well. You can relate your shot to your opponent's shot and vice versa. The idea of caging is when you play a shot directly back at your opponent. Okay, and so the idea is to disrupt the opponent's time and space. And so a caging is more likely a shot that can be played down the middle of third of the court. And there's another reason for doing that, obviously, other than disrupting time and space, is it takes away your opponent's ability to create a sharp angle. Okay, so it puts them in a very precarious position, if you will, on the court. The 4th specific response to match anxiety would be the momentum scoring system, which what the momentum scoring system does is it quantifies momentum shifts in point play by counting the number of consecutive points you win or lose, right? So keeping up with that real score of, are you winning consecutive points in a row, or is your opponent winning consecutive points? And then how do you negotiate extending, being able to win multiple points, or stopping your opponent? And so the momentum score really tells a better story of how momentum shifts rather than just using the game score. Because the game score, as we know, it advances to high numbers. It goes from love to 15 to 30 to 40. And then it basically expands the human mind to think that you're further ahead than you really are. So to say that you're 40-15 versus it was 30-15 and you were down and you won the next point, right? Because your opponent won 2 points in a row and you stopped them from winning 3. And so now the score's 40-15, but you won the last point. It's the momentum score gives you a better story of what's actually happening inside of a game. So these are 4 things that we've come up with at the Art of Winning to address specifically how a player, what kind of arrange their thinking in regards to controlling, or not, I would say controlling, but manage or negotiate the anxiety that's there.
Couldn't agree more.
Can I throw something in there?
Sure.
You know, while you were talking, I was thinking about how this fits into the Jim Lair, 16-second cure. And in my experience, players do a great job, I think, of learning to go through the decisive stage and mentally putting that point to bed. They do a good job of going through the relaxation stage. They understand rituals. They do the ritual really well, but they do very poorly at the preparation stage. So I think what this really fits into and really empowers is a really great way to conceptualize how to do your preparation stage where you're planning your next point. You're quickly evaluating what just happened in the last point, what's the situation I'm currently in, and what kind of point do I want to play here? What's the first 2-shot combination that I want to start this point off with? So I see a lot of value in that, because I think as a coach, I find it frustrating to fully help my players conceptualize what it means to fully prepare for the next point.
Can I just ask Steve, Steve Rogers there. Steve, is it all right if I bring you in?
Sure.
Hi. We were talking yesterday about your experience about the players, and I promised I'd bring this question up. Maybe we can answer it. You were saying that you've got somewhere with your players doing 1-2 reset during matches, and that's having a great effect, and maybe some 2-shot sequencing. But you also can you explain what you said to me about match continuity?
Yeah, so when we talked yesterday, we talked about I was definitely a culprit of lots of repetition, building points, trying to get into the point. And it was probably about a year or so ago. And slowly I've been adapting and trying to get my players to be more about sequencing and S1 plus S2 and R1 at R2 and getting them into that. And I've definitely seen an advantage to that, and growth is going. But unfortunately, I'm having a hard time right now with consistency, through match in, match out, week in, week out. Can they consistently repeat this over and over and over again? And that's where my struggle is right now with the players, is can we keep repeating and being comfortable in these situations? And so, with you just said, styling is great. I mean, I think I can add that piece in, and that might help. But I don't know if you guys have a suggestion on how to get more things repeatable, more things more continuous throughout.
You mean the momentum scoring, Steve?
Yeah. We haven't actually even touched in on momentum scoring yet. So
Ooh.
So I'm definitely going to look forward to that once I start it, once we can get back on the court. But I haven't ventured into that. So is that something that, have you guys seen that's going to change that?
Yeah, so the momentum scoring concept is going to it's going to pull together your sequencing message. Okay. So, I call this the GPS navigation system to win. So you have game, point, shot. And when it comes down to it, you've got to refocus back into the shots, the 2-shot sequencing, right? But then once you do that, you win a point. You've got to understand that once a player understands, once they win 1 point, there's an interesting thing that happens psychologically if you're not keeping the momentum score. Okay. You win the first point and you're up 15 love. And there's almost like this sense, and you can ask your players this. This is crazy. I've done this, but they actually think they're up by a lot because it's the number 15. And they almost like think that they can just, it would be nice to get to 30, but it's okay if they lose the next point. And that whole attitude right there is just very interesting to me. And so what we try to get the players to understand is, look, ultimately you're trying to win 2 points in a row. You've got to do that at some point during the game, whether it's at the beginning, the middle, or the end of the game, right? Love, 30 all, deuce. Even if you're playing no ad scoring, that 2 points in a row will give you that edge, that momentum. And even though it may seem small, it is very powerful. So to be able to get your players to plan their next 2-shot sequence based on whether they won 1 point in a row, 2 points in a row, 3 points in a row is extremely valuable. But I understand your frustration with getting players to be able to consistently execute the first 2 shots over and over, and then the next 2 shots over and over, because it's very difficult to do. And one of the reasons why I think it's so difficult is there's a few reasons. Number one, it's much harder to begin the point and get into a flow quickly. The only way you can really do it is if your planning is there, okay? And you also flexible as a player if your plan doesn't go exactly the way you wanted it. So you have a contingency plan. So rehearsing 2-shot sequencing in practice is huge. So if I'm rehearsing a wide serve and then it comes back to my forehand and I go back, reverse, cross, and reverse the player, that's my primary. But if it comes to my backhand, what do I do? If I go outside wide on the serve, it comes to my backhand, what do I do? Well, if a player has that, oh, I'm just going to take the backhand that way, right? And they don't change their mind. So what I found is if you rehearse the patterns, the player rehearses the patterns, if they understand there's always a contingency there, and they're able to actually be more creative and adapt off of the plan, right? It's kind of like building a house. If you make a really strong foundation, you can build whatever you want to on there. And then being able to help a player reconcile that, look, you're going to go into matches and you're not going to see a big shift in your numbers. They're going to be small little shifts here and there, because if players could do this on a consistent level, the numbers wouldn't stay at 60 to 70% of all points in 0 to 4. The percentages would shift higher if players could really do this. But the problem, and like I said, is it's much harder to start the point than actually get into the flow of the point. So the website, we go in the website, in the membership, we go into great detail about how to kick this process started going and how to be able to navigate with your player the system. I mean, I've already laid out the primary and secondary S and S1 patterns and R and R1 patterns. I identified all of them, and they're a limited number, okay? But there is a way to help a player navigate which patterns they're going to use based on the momentum score. And that's a crucial element that you're definitely going to want to start to introduce with your players.
Okay, so then are you giving all these patterns to your players initially? Meaning you say, all right, here's 10 patterns. These are the ones we're going to be working on for however long we're going to work on.
The first thing I do is I have all the patterns, and we go through a period of a week or so, and I assess each player on their capability of executing each of the patterns. They're 2-shot patterns, right? So, and I've got my check, and I'm checking off. Okay, you're going to do a forehand combination, and you're going to go run reverse, and we're going to test that. If you do it 3 times, can you win? Can you do it 3 times successfully? Or do you miss one of those and only do it twice or only do it once? And so that gives me a gauge. So I go through all of that, and then we kind of choose. And I do this with the player. I'm saying, okay, which ones do you like the best? do you like to do the best? And so we'll list out those. I actually have the player list them themselves. It's their homework. Because
Sterling, can I ask?
Yeah, go ahead.
Repeat that, yeah? And
Yeah.
can you tell us exactly what you do and define what you mean? Because it's brilliant. Honestly, if you want to write something down, team, write this down, because I'm just working on it myself. And Sterling's method here of going through every player's first shot sequences, okay, but also their first two shot combinations. Can you explain the difference between the first two shot combination and the first and the sequencing? Okay. And can you explain the exact pattern? Because we need to be specifically dealing with match anxiety. So thank you.
Okay, so when you're serving, I basically divide the service box into 3 sections. You have an outside run section, which is the wide serve. You have a middle section, body, I call that the cage. And then on the inside run is a T serve, right? And so you have outside run, cage, inside run on both sides. So if you take the combinations, I can hit an outside run serve on deuce and then hit a forehand, hit an outside run, and then hit a backhand next. There you go. That's it. Then you move on to the cage. I can cage serve and then hit a forehand. I can cage serve, then hit a backhand, and then go to the inside run. And so that's how you build the combinations. And the combinations are not necessarily, only the serve is directional as far as which one you're hitting, but the forehand or backhand can go anywhere. Because I'm just looking for, can the player hit that serve and reset and hit that forehand into the court? Then we start getting more specific. Well, can you take the forehand back to the deuce court after you go outside run and they give you four? Can you go back? Can you take the forehand down the line into ad court? And so you start to get into primary, secondary patterns. And so on the deuce court, you have 12 primary patterns total. On the ad court, you have 12 primary patterns. Then you have 9 secondary and 9 secondary like that. So that's it. And what I mean by primary, secondary is a primary shot goes to the biggest part of the court. So if I hit a shot, if I hit down the line and if I'm standing on deuce and I hit down the line, I'm hitting to the smallest part of the court. So that's secondary. But if I hit back cross court, I'm hitting to more court. That's primary. So that's how I define them. So that's a combination on the serve. On the return, there's only 4 combinations that you can hit for the first 2 shots. You can hit a forehand, 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 backhand, backhand, forehand, and a backhand, backhand combination. And those are from the baseline, obviously. And then you have forehand return, forehand volley. If you come in, not a lot that's happening, but that works. I'm working on those now. But just talking about baseline, forehand, forehand. Can the player do those from both sides? I can tell you that most players will struggle going backhand to forehand or forehand to backhand than they will forehand, forehand, backhand, backhand, because they're having to switch the software in their brain from going to hitting a forehand to going to hit to a backhand. And those are 2 different motor learning skills, right? They're separate. Once you get the combinations, the player understands the combinations that are going to occur, then you start to get them into patterns. Are they going to run the player? Are they going to reverse the player? Or are they going to cage the player? So I started to define patterns with language because it's in my strategy 7 in my book, 7 on Court Strategies, play patterns that tell a story. If I say I'm going to hit the ball cross court, well, I know what I'm doing. I've just told myself what I'm going to do. But the problem with that language, cross court, is it doesn't probe for information back. So if I say I'm going to run you and then I'm going to run you, well, now I'm looking to see what does the run do to my opponent. So language is really important when you talk about patterns because it begins to build a story in the player's head of what that combination is doing to their opponent. And the whole idea of developing patterns is not necessarily that you know what you are going to do, although that's important, but is what you're about to do, how does that disrupt your opponent? How does that make your opponent uncomfortable? Because there's so many players that just run players back and forth, and that opponent over there loves to do that because that's all they train to do, right? So you know, that's when you start getting into these how do you beat a pusher, right? Or how do you beat an aggressive baseliner? Well, it's through pattern work, really. And the more specific you are, and to the player, they're able to rehearse those, and then they automate those. So that's the idea. So we're listing all of these combinations and patterns, and we're just checking them off as we rehearse them in practice. And I'm writing little notes because we'll keep score. You know, can you do this 3 times in a row? Oh, okay, they only did it 2 out of 3. And then as a coach, now I have data to look at to go, okay, this player is not very good at their backhand forehand combination on the first 2 shots if I do this with the ball. And that's the other element. If I kick it high to their backhand on the ad, and then I hit them a shot they have to run to their forehand, they can't do that as well as if I kick it high, they come back, and then I reverse them, and they have to hit a backhand. So you start to find out very quickly how good is your player. And it's all based on, can they begin the point well? Can they remain in balance? Do they have good movement skills? Are they able to accelerate, decelerate? Are they able to change directions and maintain their balance while doing so? Or can they create space if they get caged on one of those first 2 shots, right? One of the biggest issues that players have when they serve is the return comes right back at them and they can't get out of the way. And the reason, players practice serves and they don't practice serve to S1. They don't practice the movement sequence enough. So they hit a great serve and the ball comes back on top of them and they lose the point, and we go, oh, it must be their technique on their serve. We need to make their serve. No, it's not their serve that's the problem. It's they can't freaking get out of the way of the next ball that's coming around. They hit a bomb of a serve, but they can't move because they don't practice it on the practice court. Okay? So this is what we're all about here at the Art of Winning, is give you the understanding that you've got to rehearse these. And then there's a lot of flexibility in this, right? This is a methodology, but there's so much flexibility, and you can, because as a coach, you can play what kind of type of shot back to that player you want, or you can watch 2 players battle it out and see how they respond to each other. And then you can have a player play against an aggressive baseliner and see how the pattern works. Play against a pusher. What patterns work better against a pusher starting out? So this is the idea that we're putting forth here.
Now, I know we're talking about anxiety, and so obviously different players get anxiety from different places, and fear comes from different ways. But what you're talking about, patterns and all these things that they're thinking about, is that replacing the anxiety that's coming in? And is that what you see?
It's basically, that's what I call negotiating the anxiety. Okay. You're using the power of the information of what I'm going to do and the action of doing it to negotiate the anxiety, to hold it at bay, to however you want to describe it, you know, to replace it, to sort of contain it, if you will, or to minimize it. But the issue here is concentration and focus, right? The issue is not the anxiety itself. It's how you respond to the anxiety. And how you do that is by being focused and concentrated on an action, and then being able to accomplish that action, right? Be able to struggle through the accomplishment of the action. And that's how you learn to deal with that pressure and anxiety. And you begin to start to be able to hold it in your hand. And now you're in control of you're in control of the anxiety. It's not in control of you, right? Because if you can have conversation with your player, the minute that they start succumbing to anxiety and pressure, look at their emotional response. It's all over the place. That means they're not focused on something.
Can I add?
Yes.
when I first met you, Sterling, I was working on the mental toughness and the psychology aspect of the game, and match anxiety was my primary area of study. And what I tried to do was I thought, well, we're going to tackle this head on. There's got to be a psychological solution to the problem of match anxiety. And honestly, my work, it was fantastic, even though I say so myself. I wrote tons of stuff, all about the narrative that starts in your head and so on. Do you remember that? Oh, you heard about the narrative that plays, the story that people tell themselves, and this was the problem. And then we looked at this idea of controlling your thoughts. Okay, can you control your thoughts? And I wrote loads of stuff on how you can try and control your thoughts. It was a complete failure, right? I mean, I know it was a research project, but it ended up, right? The conclusion was there is no way you can control your own thoughts. If you spend 25 years in meditation practice, you might have, I don't know, 5 minutes of bliss a day. Other than that, there is no way that you can do that. You can't. The thought goes like this. It goes, whoom. By the time the thoughts gone in your head, right? It's so much faster. You can't block them out. Honestly, it is impossible. So, and this was part of the problem that we said at the beginning. Most psychologists, particularly in sport, go on about controlling your thoughts. You can't. Okay? And this is part of the problem of anxiety. It starts with thinking. It seems like an emotion, but actually it's the thoughts. You actually really can't do much about match anxiety. All right? It's going to be there. You've got to deal with it. It's uncomfortable. Okay? When I met Sterling, though, I realized that the psychology problem wasn't actually much of a problem, because we replaced this idea of trying to replace your thoughts with a system that uses reason and rationality, another human thing, right? And we did that through counting. Counting is a really good way of countering thoughts that are in your head, right? Now, there's a guy, Viktor Frankl, who wrote a book. Sorry, Johan, he is an academic, but he's really good. And what Viktor Frankl said was there's a shift in consciousness, and this is what you need, right? A subtle shift where you can start to observe your thoughts and your anxieties, all right? And you do that, and gradually, right? It's only a little shift, but it's a difference between night and day. And you can see this in players and in your own thinking. Because once you start to calm your brain down with this thinking, and thinking in terms of shot sequences, planning, and then counting between points, which is where the stress occurs, right? You're not going to stop these thoughts coming in your head. They're always going to be there, right? But they are not primary. They are not the primary focus. It's the numbers. That is why scoring, right? Internal scoring is the solution to the psychological problem of anxiety, in my opinion. Sorry, I've made a very bold claim there, Sterling. It's backtrack on that, but that was what we found. You're silent, mate.
You're muted, Sterling.
When you start to define players, or help players define patterns with regards to running, reversing, and caging, you'll hear, in their head, they're going, run, reverse, cage, right? So when the player is hitting the ball, they're thinking what they're doing, right? They know what they're doing, and then they're looking for the feedback, right? And I can talk about this all day long with as passionately as I can, but until you go out and do it with a player and experience it even yourself, it is absolutely, to me, it's mind-blowing. And I say this because it blew my mind when it first happened to me. See, all of this sort of happened to me, right? Because I was looking one day And I saw something that I had never seen before. I saw the struggle of beginning a point. And I saw a point beginning and then it end quickly. And then I saw a point go a little longer and then the next one end quickly. And so through talking to players and just really understanding what were the solutions for anxiety and what was I seeing? And are the solutions really helping a player deal with these things? And what I discovered is, unless you have something to fill your mind with, you have nothing to combat those rampant thoughts of anxiety, frustration, anger, fear, right? Because it's going to hit you. It's constantly coming at you, but you've got to take captive every thought in your mind. And on a tennis court, obviously you don't want to overthink. So that's why these strategies are based on very simplistic concepts of counting 1, 2, reset, 1, 2, reset. And then the idea of making those 2 shots mean something more than numbers. Run, cage, reverse, right? And then building them as like building blocks on top of each other. When a player's rehearsing these, the more they rehearse them. I mean, I've got players that have been doing this for 3-4 years. They don't even think about it anymore. They're just a computer. They do it so fast. They compute it so fast in their head and they see it coming back so quickly, they're already in position. And that's why every kid thinks I'm like Flash Gordon, like I'm the fastest human being on the planet. But it's not my feet, it's my eyes. And it's my understanding of what is about to happen before it happens. And you can start to project exactly what's coming back. You know, if I play Johan, he's going to throw some crazy stuff in there.
Oh, I just got to mess your hair up. That's all.
But eventually I'm going to catch on to what he's doing because we're both playing in a finite space and he can only do but so much. And then he has tendencies. If I start to read his tendencies, that puts me closer to him, right? And I'm sure, you know, you can think about all the matches you've ever played against different, and you can start to break it down. It's there. And just we're trying to just frame it out so that you can sort of put a frame around all these ideas we've always talked about sort of out there. And we're just trying to frame them out so that you can sequentially go through them and then find the symbiotic relationship between all of the ideas and how they fit together.
Well, can I say something? Sterling, I just want to congratulate you on what you've done. This takes enormous amount of time to figure this all out. Players like myself who grew up in the hinterlands of Africa on a farm. I mean, I wish that I had this knowledge when I was 10 years old, 12 years old, 14, in my formative years, to be able to get the apps into my software so that I can become that supercomputer. It took me too long to learn this. And I learned it by the seat of my pants. And what you're talking about is, of course I know that, you know, but you made it so simple, and you're absolutely correct in terms of framing every aspect of these things. And I could not congratulate you and Dan for doing this. I'm an apostle. I like to learn. I was a good tennis player. I think I could have been much better. I think I could have been 1 or 2 in the world if I had this knowledge and this continuous learning curve. I think I was thrown into the pen of competition when I was quite green and quite immature. You know, I arrived in Florida, this is my own example, 1978, and I was ranked 836 in the world. And by September of that same year, I was top 20 in the world. Talk about getting this is a mind screw of epic proportions. And, you know, how I survived that, I don't know to this day, but I honestly think that, you know, you've seen a lot of these kids, you know, that are great players. But let me just add to this segment that you just mentioned about how you frame everything. I think as a professional player, if I can say and add something to that, is the fact that I got framed pretty good when I went from 800 to 400. You know, there was a lot of framing there. Oh, gosh, you know, I finally beat this guy. I didn't beat him the last 2 times. So you frame that, you become better, you get knowledge, you act on it, right? I'm filing this. But then I walk onto the center court at US Open in the quarterfinals, never been there before, and I'm walking behind Vitas Gerulaitis. He's got 2 state troopers. I got 2, 3 rackets in my duffel bag. 3 weeks ago, I was playing challengers. My mind was analog, and I'm going into this digital space, if I can better describe it. It was painful to even walk onto that center court and feel the energy of 18,000 people screaming for a New Yorker, a favorite son. I'm a farm boy from Africa. I mean, talk about a lamb going to slaughter, right? And so what I could say is that experience was a massive frame for my mind, even though I got whacked in 3 sets, but it was a necessary pass-through learning curve, another picture frame in my mind, another file that I had to file in my subconscious to understand where this could go. And that's why I commend you guys, because you really make it easy for me as a coach and as a former player to talk to my students about this, because it's fascinating and it's wonderful to be able to talk about this, because kids just don't know. You know, this is the same process as if you're a primary school teacher to go to a high school, then you go to college, and then you're going to go get your PhD. I got a PhD in common sense from learning it on the seat of my pants over many decades being a professional athlete. But you know, this is just an absolute wonderful forum that you guys did. I mean, I'm a junkie. I'm going to be on here a lot.
Thanks, Sean. Those are I really appreciate that. It means a lot to me, and it's taken me 8 years of every day. My wife thought I was crazy sitting up to 3 and 4 in the morning crunching numbers.
I can calm her down with a glass of wine.
Exactly. He's good on that. But yeah. So it's here's what I like to say, and I want to wrap this session up today. We're definitely going to keep talking more about this, but it is a powerful thing to be able to give kids this type of what I call psychological ammunition, right? They can go in now with a clearer perspective of what could happen and then how to respond to that. And so I'm excited about everything that we're putting out, and we're discovering new things every day. And we just want to keep having these discussions. But thanks everyone for joining us today. This is a great lead off, and we'll probably come back and revisit this and keep going from here. So thanks a lot, everyone.
Thanks.